Vasily Smyslov, Andrey Terekhov, The Offer, and we'll be talking about Vasily Smyslov. This is the first volume, 500 pages. Absolutely fantastic book, 500 pages. And the life, the games, the events, all of the stuff related to Vasily Smyslov. And we'll be talking with the author about Vasily Smyslov as the person, Vasily Smyslov as the player, Vasily Smyslov as the world champion, and why he was that much forgotten. Because there is not much literature about Vasily Smyslov, and I am very curious to ask why Andrey Terekhov decided to fill the gap in the chess literature, because Vasily Smyslov's legacy shouldn't be forgotten, and we'll be talking about it. What about that? Are you with me? Okay, we are officially on the stream. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation, Andrey. I'm super happy and very honored that you want to tell us about Vasily Smyslov. I just put the title as Vasily Smyslov for Forgotten World Champion, and we'll be talking at this style because there was the theme that you were the guest at Perpetual Chess Podcast at Ben Johnson, right? And this was the case, the case that I remember about this interview. And I would be very happy if we just discussed about Vasily Smyslov, all of the, let's say, interesting events, interesting situations, a little bit of history, because there will be pretty much about it. But first, if you would like to introduce yourself, how you get into chess and all of the stuff, it would be great.
Sure. So I got into chess like pretty much everybody else, I guess, in those days and time. I was brought to the what they were called the Palace of Pioneers in my hometown, in the area when I was about 6 years old, and my parents couldn't get me into musical school, and the only thing that was open at I think 7 p.m. was chess section, so they brought me to chess, and that's how I started. I started playing. I enjoyed it. I played in the tournaments, in the juniors. I quickly made progress. I'm from St. Petersburg, Leningrad at the time, and so I started with my own like region of St. Petersburg, and then like I played in the city tournaments, and then I played in the Soviet Union junior tournaments, and so on and so forth. And basically, I kept on doing that when I was in the school, and by the time I graduated at around 18 years old, I got a FIDE master title. I was playing in a Russian championships. I was like fighting for prizes, but I was already 16 years old when I graduated, and I looked around and I saw like in my town they were already like we had Svidler, we had Kamsky, we had a few other grandmasters in kind of in the waiting, so to speak. And I was looking at myself, I dropped out of chess for a while, studied in the university, got myself kind of a profession, went into computer science. But then I went back to chess. Chess is like one of those things that it's very difficult to let go. And several years later, I started playing again a little bit. Then I moved to Germany for work, and I joined a club there, played in tournaments, played for a team. And basically, I still do that to this day. I still play every now and then, not very active, but I still enjoy playing chess. So that's how I got into into this.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. And now let's go into a little bit of the stuff that we were trying to get in a moment. First of all, I'll just thank you very much for publishing. Yeah, I got the book. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for the book, because the book is the labor of love. Therefore, I know it because there is a lot of stuff inside that. We'll be talking about the process of publishing the next volumes, because as far as I know, we are just planning some like a little bit bigger project. And therefore, this is the book, guys. If you would like to have it, this is the book Vasily Smyslov, 500 pages and pretty much very, very much detailed biography, the first volume. And just a quick question, how many volumes are you going to publish? How many volumes are you going to write? Because this is the, let's say, the most important question at this moment that I cannot sleep. I want to know the answer.
I don't know the answer either.
Maybe estimation. Maybe estimation.
It's hard to say. What I can say now is that I'm working on the second one. I mean, I've been working on the second one even before I published the first one. It like so happened I started writing from the childhood of Vasily Smyslov, and my plan was to get to the moment when he becomes a world champion. And so I the very first thing I was writing was Zurich 1953, so like the candidates. I mean, the obvious place to start. I analyzed the games, and like that was very exciting. And that was already like whatever, 10 years ago, 8 years ago. And then I wrote like 1,000 pages, and at that moment I already had a publisher, and the publisher told me like, wait, stop and like let's publish the first part because nobody is going to kind of be able to carry around a book that's at 1,000 pages. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why we decided to take a kind of a cut somewhere and publish the first volume. Now, the problem, of course, like, and I was always saying, like, for the past few years that I had a second volume, like 80% ready, and it's still 80% ready. So, like, the
Oh.
one thing I learned in the publication of the first volume is that from the first 80% to 100%, there is another 80%, maybe more. So like there is so much in editing and kind of corrections and
Mm-hmm.
finding the right photographs, kind of layout and all of this stuff. So like it's still quite some time away. Now to your question, how many more volumes? I tried to talk a little bit about that, but honestly, I don't know because so the second volume was going to finish at 1957 when
Mm-hmm.
Smyslov becomes a champion
Okay.
at the end of the second match with Botvinnik, but before the return match. And yeah, I have it mostly written. But then, from there, so 57, and Smyslov played all the way, like his last games are already in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
So year 2000 something, I don't remember, 2000, 2001. So that, that gives you almost what 50 years, 45 years to
Mm-hmm.
go. So it's really difficult to tell. Like, and I was also kind of half jokingly offering to my publisher, like maybe after the volume 2 I should do immediately like volume 5, because the Star Wars thing where
Yeah.
you get immediately to the place where it was like the point in time where it became again very interesting and exciting in Smyslov's career, which is probably 1980s, and he is famous return to the candidates and like all the way to the match with Kasparov. But between like 1957 and like 1980s, there is lots and lots that happened in his life. So I don't know. I mean, like, if I really, and I don't know if I even have it in me that to be able to finish all of that, like on my own. I still have, long life hopefully ahead of me in retirement to work on that. But yeah, it's. I never realized how big of a project that's going to be when I started. I mean, if I did,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't have started. So like I know, like maybe 5 volumes, maybe more. It's hard to tell. It's still enormous amount of work to be done to cover his career.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you very much. And now another question that is pretty much connecting to this. What was the reason that you decided to write about Smyslov? Because there are a lot of players, a lot of figures in the chess world, and there are a lot of various topics, for example, some like chess improvement, some like the endgame, some like tactics. There are very, very many various types of books, workbooks, all of the materials. And what was the reason, or maybe reasons, that you decided to fill the gap in the chess literature, writing the books about Smyslov? What was the reason that you say, yes, it is very important, because of course everybody knows that it is a lot of the devotion, right? You need to devote a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of, let's say, contacts to search for the materials, to devote the time to write actual book. I made some kind of analysis. There is a huge commitment, if I can say that. And what made you to into this? Why did you decide that, yes, I am going to do so?
It was a combination of factors, and like there wasn't one particular thing, but basically I was when I started writing that book, I was living in Singapore and for many years, and I talked a lot to my colleagues there, like chess players. I mean, there is a relatively small but vibrant chess community, and it's getting bigger now. And they have actually quite a few really good chess book writers there,
Mm-hmm.
surprisingly. So you have Olympia Orkan, you have Junior Tay, you have, there was also Kevin Koveming, who became a grandmaster. He wrote an opening book. But the others were like, so Olympia was writing historical chess books, he's famous in his field. Junior wrote a couple of books like on openings. He also wrote books on Vasily Ivanchuk, for example, and yeah, so basically a couple of interesting books. A lot of them appeared in like move by move series, and I was talking to them, and I was also like kind of flirting with the idea. Maybe I should also write something, like why
Uh-huh.
not? And it was actually Junior who's suggested, like, if you want to write about something, you need to write something what you know, what you kind of studied, and also where you can add things that basically haven't been said before.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, when we were, I had some other ideas like about other players or tournaments to write about them, but his suggestion was like, you know what, like he was looking at my style, looking at what I knew, like, and like I came from the very traditional kind of a chess education, Soviet chess education. So you know what, like you probably, you should be writing about Smyslov. You speak Russian, you know his games, you studied them, and nobody wrote about the guy.
Mm-hmm.
So and basically, yeah, like basically, so that kind of clicked. Many years before that, I lived after Smyslov passed away. It was 2010. I bought a book. My children were at the time was studying chess as well. Like so, I was sometimes bringing them to the club, and they had a small kind of a chess bookshop. And so I bought the book. I still have it at home, like a thick red book, which was called in Russian version was called something else, but in English it's Smyslov's Base Games. It was published as Smyslov's Base Games.
For chess
Two
for
volumes.
Vasily Smyslova.
No, it was
like that?
Летопись шахматного творчества. It was actually a
something
very
like
complicated title. Yeah, like kind of the how do you even translate it into English? Like the history of the chess creativity, kind of more or less. And which is, by the way, which was also very important for Smyslov. He didn't see his chess as sports. He was very much like, I'm an artist. Like he was really thinking of himself as an artist first and foremost. And all on top of that, of course, he was a fantastic player and like a sportsman. But he was looking for logic, for beauty in chess, so to speak. And so I bought the book, and because my kids were doing a lot of hours there in the club, it was in Kyiv in Ukraine, and so I was like going there together with them, and like I was just like, and in the chess club there is plenty of chess boards and chess pieces, so they were going on their own lectures, and I was sitting with that book and kind of played through I think there were 325 games there in the book, like, and they're beautiful. So like, and I knew Smyslov quite a bit, but not as much as other champions, and again, like I don't think I was an exception in my childhood. Like everybody studied, I don't know, Botvinnik. Botvinnik was like, like
the father of Soviet chess, right?
Yeah, everybody studied Tal, of course, because like they loved it. I mean, like not even necessarily because the teachers were like the coaches were fond so much about that. But yeah, like Capablanca, yeah, for sure, Alekhine and so on and so forth. But Smyslov was always like on the periphery. And so, like, I knew some games. I read his more like famous book that was published in the 70s, In Search of Harmony. But these, like, most of these games were new to me. So I was impressed. And so basically, when it all like kind of came together, and I had time on my hands, and I was in a very good environment, like with other people who kind of were supported, kind of cheered me on. And so I started doing that. So I started, and I think the original idea was actually just to do the book. And why Smyslov actually came in the first place, because remember, Junior was an author of these Move by Move series that was published by Everyman Chess.
Yeah.
And so he did a book on Ivanchuk. He did like a couple of opening books on Benko, on I think Old Indian, something else. And so basically we were looking at, like, if you're looking at all the books that were published in this series, Smyslov is absent. And in fact, if you're looking anywhere else, Smyslov is absent. Other than the books he wrote himself, so which are several, but basically nobody else wrote, like about Mikhail Tal. There is like hundreds of books probably, same about Capablanca, same, pretty much anyone you take. Well, not everyone, but a lot of the, like there are more and less popular champions, so to speak. So Smyslov was conspicuously absent. And so, yeah, like the initial thing was I analyzed a couple of games, primarily from Zurich 53. I wrote like a biographical sketch about his childhood. And so I started kind of going around and, shopping for a publisher. And Everyman Chess, I think, was the first one to like that we approached because of the connections and through Junior. And basically said, nah, no one's ever gonna buy the book. So no one was interested. So, okay. So I went to other publishers, and eventually the one that said yes was Russell Enterprise. and Hammond Russell, kind of the main figure, the main person behind this publishing house.
Mm-hmm.
And so I signed the contract, and then it took me another few years actually to publish the first volume. So that was kind of, well, that was not really, I mean, I couldn't even estimate how much time it would take, and I was very naive.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, he was very patient with me, and like he was, he didn't mind waiting for the book. And so it did appear in, what's already like almost 2 years ago, actually.
August 2020. It was the forward
I think it's August 2020 is when I wrote the preface. I like put the,
at least.
like put the final kind of but yeah, it's like that's when you write it.
Mm-hmm.
But when it gets published, it takes much longer. So like we put it in print, I think September, and I remember I received my copy, like advanced copy of that, like in December, just before Christmas. It was almost like a Christmas present for me. So yeah, and then it was also pandemic times, so nothing ever worked. So like the post also took longer. So most of the readers probably received it in 2021. But yeah, anyway, so like we finally got it off the ground, and took me only 3 years to get there.
Yeah, thank you very much. It is impressive because there are the various, let's say, people, various connections, and something like improving one by one, something like getting step by step. But it is the most important when you have something in your hands, right? No matter how much work you've done, but if you have something like finished, no matter if it's one of the 5th book, one of the 10th book, but whatever you have, it is something like, oh my god, we just simply get off the ground. And another question related to the book, because I know that it is a huge book in the sense that it needs to be invested a lot of work, a lot of, let's say, time and connections. I am very much curious about the, let's say, materials and the research. What kind of stuff have you done? Who helped you? Maybe you were in Russia, maybe you just get into the historians, maybe any other players, maybe, for example, famous composers. How the process of collecting all of the materials and processing them were taking place? If you just get into this for our viewers, it would be great.
Sure. No, I mean, there is some basic material that's readily available to anyone, right? I mean, there are games, there are, his biographical sketches, autobiographical sketches. Although Smyslov was a very private person, he didn't talk much about himself. Like, he would always keep telling the same story, very limited. He didn't like to talk about himself. He preferred to focus on chess. And so that's where I started. Like, I started with the games. Then I started looking into I started with with his childhood, how he entered chess. And so the next thing I did was I just went into reading lots and lots of journals and newspapers of the time. So Smyslov played his first games in 1935, and so basically that's more or less where I started. I went and I found the archives of the journals like Chess in USSR, and there was a newspaper. They published it every 5 days, 64. It was actually Chess and Checkers newspaper at the time. So I started reading it basically. I got I think I started even earlier. I started 34, and then I started reading it all the way to 1941 when all these publications kind of stopped being published because of the war. But basically, I write it down. Lots and lots of primary, tiny little details, where he played, which competitions, photos, very brief, notes, he's playing semi-finals of Moscow championships. It's the middle of competition. He scored that many points, and basically there's people ahead of him, behind him, and so on and so forth. So that's how I started. But it very clearly became clear. I mean, it's not enough. It's very basic. And also his, especially pre-war years, are very poorly known for many reasons. Part of that, a lot of the materials disappeared, perished during the war. The games didn't survive. There was a bomb that hit his building in Moscow. Basically all of his materials before war kind of got burned. And then I started looking, okay, how can I supplement that? How can I add something to that? And yeah, like I went to people I knew. I made the connections through the Russian chess circles, and the first person that really helped me a lot was Sergei Voronkov, who is the famous Russian chess historian. I mean, he's a household name, and he knows everybody, and he's been in that, like circles for decades, right? I mean, like he was in editing board of the, still in the Soviet times, like in '64 and chess in USSR and all this stuff. He knew Bronstein and so on and so forth. So he gave me some photos, but more importantly, he gave me more connections. And the most important of them all was that he introduced me to the heirs of Smyslov. So basically, Smyslov, when he died, they didn't have children. I mean, he had a stepson. That's a different story. But also, like, he died very young. So basically, when Smyslov and his wife died, there was no direct heirs. But basically, everything went to the one of his relatives from his wife's side, actually. And so he introduced me to that person. I wrote to him, I called him, and then 2 months later, I was sitting on a plane going to Moscow and basically going to Smyslov's house, essentially. It's in Moscow, kind of suburbs, like suburbs of Moscow, like, I spent a week basically just going through his stuff, so I was quite amazed that, like, I went, one thing that really kind of, I mean, I knew he was under researched, but I never realized, like, it was, nobody ever cared to do anything about it. Like, so when I talked to this person, Yuri Fominych, and he told me, like, well, there are boxes, like, I don't know, like maybe 20 or 30, there are all sorts of, I don't know, like score sheets, his manuscripts, photos. Well, you go and sort them. Nobody ever did.
Amazing story.
So yeah, and I was sitting in his, like his study, Smyslov's own study, and like I was going through the boxes and boxes of stuff, like, and then of course, like, they were also showing me other things, like his the medal here that he received for becoming a world champion. He's also at his home, like cups that he won at like European and Olympiads and stuff like that. So like, it was amazing. The only problem was, like, there was so much, like it was like drinking from the fire hose. And I mean, I couldn't sort out anything on, like, I very quickly, I realized I just need, like, to capture as much as possible. I was taking pictures, like, with the phone, most of the time with the phone. And like, I was doing, like, almost like a machine, like, I was also scanning photos, some of his manuscripts, things that, like, you probably need in a higher resolution, but most of it, like, was just clicking. And after that, it took me months when I already went home to kind of sort it. And from the very beginning, because I knew I only had a limited time, I kind of limited myself to this time period that I decided for myself, like 35 to whatever, 50. Actually, it was a little, I think I went beyond 57. I think I went to 60 something, just to be sure.
Just for our viewers, because they are popping up. This is the first volume, just for a while, interrupt for a while, sorry. The first volume is about the early years, 1921 to 1948, and therefore there will be more volumes. And our author, because our guest, is the author of this book, FIDE Master Andrey Terekhov, and we are talking about why we need to know about Smyslov, about his life, about his games, about his, let's say, biography, and about his legacy, because it's very important, because as probably most of you guys know, that Vasily Smyslov is forgotten world champion, and that's why Andrey decided to devote some time and energy to to fill the gap in the chess literature. Please continue.
Right. So
you're talking about clicking the photos and selecting them at home.
Yeah, and then there was plenty more, like, activities like that. So and like, it's kind of, one thing led to another. So you're like, I interviewed Yuri Averbach. He was still alive at the time, and he was frail, but his memory was very much intact. And he was, like, probably the last person who could tell about Smyslov when both of them were boys, essentially, right? So Averbach and Smyslov, like, first met in 1930. 35 or 36, and then like by 38, January 38, they were living in the same hotel room like at the junior championship of the Soviet Union, right? So like, and I was asking him like, okay, like how did it look like? And so I did 2 interviews with Averbach again through Voronkov, and then there was another weird stories like in. When Smyslov was young, he befriended somebody from the same, basically living in the same area. His name was Bazit Zagurov. He was a guy who was 2 years older, who influenced him quite a bit. So it was one of the reasons, he was probably the main reason why Smyslov went into Moscow Aviation Institute, which later he thought was a mistake. But Zagurov studied there, and there were a couple of other guys that they all started together. So, and I managed to find Zagurov's family. So, like again, Zagurov died during the war, like in 1941, in like probably December. Nobody knows actually. He was like the exact days are unknown. But his family, like he had sisters, and one of them actually wrote memoirs. Private, like I don't think they are published, like they only exist in the family. But again, somebody connected me to that family. I was searching for them, and they again, like they had some like unique documents. For example, they kept all the score sheets and like tournament tables that Zagurov kept, and he was one of the main organizers. Like I have dozens of pages of like how they all played blitz in like from 1935 to 1939, 1940. You know, like and like have like pages and pages of like tournament tables, like with how and like scores, including between them. They played quite a few. Like they have photos. They also had some letters, including a letter from Smyslov, which was like quite unique. So Smyslov during the war, he didn't serve. He was evacuated. He went to Kazakhstan, studied, and he was still in the university in the institute. And he wrote a letter to the mother of his friend, none of them knew that his friend was already basically dead. He was asking about like what happened to him. I don't know. I haven't received anything, something like that. And he was also talking about his life in Kazakhstan. And so they found this letter in their archives, and like they sent it to me. So Smyslov's original letter, and I included that obviously in the book. So like you have some published material, you have some games that everybody knows, but obviously what you want to add, like as a historian, is things that were not known, like some primary sources, like handwriting, like, or for example, in Smyslov's own archive, I found tons and tons of his handwriting for the books, and a lot of things that he actually wrote, and even put like in a draft of the book, but then cut. And some of them are actually more interesting than what he let in into the book. Was often the case that things that they decided to omit in the end was more interesting. Like for example, that story about like he's talking about him going to the Moscow Aviation Institute was a mistake. He didn't publish it. He wrote it, like he was reflecting on that, but he was his own most stringent censor. He was like he wasn't really letting anything personal through, and so he decided not to include it. But I thought it was very interesting. It adds to his portrait, if you know what I mean.
And to continue a little bit this thread, what could be the reason that he didn't decide to publish this, let's say, private thoughts, let's say, correspondence on all of the thoughts? Was it rather not to give the opponents any material to analyze his weaknesses in the tournament practice? Maybe was it something connected with any other stuff? What could be the reason for that?
No, it wasn't about there were no he wasn't afraid of anybody preparing for him, because he wrote the first draft of that in the late 1970s, where he was kind of written off already. I mean, he still had his last his last kind of heroic story with the candidates, but no one could predict that. And the last book, these what became Smyslov's best games, that was year 2000s. He was at the sunset of his life. He didn't have to hide anything, but he was like that. He naturally didn't like to talk about himself. He was a very private person. That was the most important. There was defining character. He was different with people he knew and trusted, with the people that that were his friends. But even then, he was reserved. He wasn't really letting anyone into the most inner sanctuary, so to speak. Yeah. So so I think it was really more of him. He didn't want to talk about it. That was who he was, and in a way that probably was one of the reasons why he's kind of
Forgotten.
quote unquote forgotten. Yeah, because like his games were fantastic, but nobody knew him as a man. Nobody knew him as a person. He was always kind of content to be a bit in the shadows.
Yeah.
And because of that, and also his style is Mikhail Tal could write nothing about himself, and his games would still, kind of be replayed over and over. Yes, Smyslov was different. So his style was like he was more in the line of, I don't know, Karpov, Capablanca, Carlsen, for that matter. So it's a little more dry.
Yeah.
So the combination of that, his style and his kind of private, reserved nature, that probably all contributed to him being a bit on the fringes of like world champions, let's say, in chess.
Thank you very much. From time to time, I'll be addressing the questions from the chat because we are having the viewers that are super grateful for you that you accepted the invitation and want to share all of the stuff with about Smyslov. One of the questions is from our friend Lol Daizo, and he asks, has researching Smyslov games influenced your own play? What about that? Because, of course, everybody knows that Smyslov was one of the strongest players in the world, especially in the end game. And being with the process of researching, analyzing, probably you must have something from him, right? Some like taking out.
I wish. It's one of the things. Like I was thinking about that as well, and obviously that probably influenced my game. Didn't improve my rating. I mean, okay, like I'm getting too old and too slow and so on and so forth.
Too old, too slow.
Yeah, like we all do. But it's very hard to copy. It's impossibly hard to copy. It's like, the same could be said about Karpov, for example. Or, I mean, I know a few other players that, you're looking at their games and they look amazing, fantastic, like they're clean, logical, clear. But you won't be able to do that. For them it comes naturally. For Smyslov, certainly he was an intuitive player first and foremost, right? For him, like it was the famous joke of Boris Spassky, that Vasily Vasilyevich, doesn't need the brain; he can play by the hand. His hand knows where to take the piece and like where to put it.
Naturally.
Right? So and by the way, that was also like why Smyslov, for example, was playing very well until his last days. If not for the failing eyesight, he would be literally playing until his last days, I'm sure. And he was also quite good, for example, in rapid play, in blitz, for the same reason. Like he was naturally good, like he knew the moves instantly, right?
Yeah.
So and try reproducing that, try copying that. It's hard, like it's you're like I'm not Smyslov. So I can say for sure, like yes, I play some openings that he did, like because I studied them. I know like a little bit like in and outs and why he played them probably by now. I tried to improve my endgame technique, and probably that helped a little. But I mean, no one is Smyslov. It's like it's very difficult. Like I mean, even after learning a ton about his game, repeating it in your own game is completely different matter.
Okay, thank you very much. And one more question related to Smyslov's approach to the game, because we'll be talking about his game, his style and influence over his contemporaries as well, is the motto that probably, I'm not sure how much it is true, that's why I would like to ask you about it, that either the players, either the journalists says that Smyslov's motto was to get into the game over the 40 or 50 moves, and if the position is even, he accepts the draw. I'm not sure how to express it, but he was something like that. If you get to the position of 40 moves, I can agree to a draw. But before that, we are just playing. What about that? Was it true?
It's like a quote attributed to Smyslov. I couldn't find it actually, the source of that. So Kasparov repeats it, and I mean he talked to Smyslov. So I'm sure he was saying something like that. Okay, even if he wasn't writing. And like basically the way they were saying is like, I will do 40 good moves, and if you do the same, then it's a draw.
Yeah, it is the perfect quote. Yes.
Yeah. And he was very good at that. I mean, like, he was very good at making 40 good moves. And by the way, his approach was different, and I'm writing about that in the book. He wasn't looking for 40 best moves. He was literally looking for 40 just very good moves, not necessarily absolutely best. He wasn't looking for that. He was a player. He was also Karpov is like that. He like doesn't necessarily care whether it's absolutely the best move, but he keeps the pressure. He keeps the game going. and most of the time his opposition cannot do that. So and that's true. I mean, that was his approach. He was very practical. After publishing this book, I actually published another article about just like one game that he played with Rogozin in Moscow 42 championship, and it was like 110 moves. So, and basically Smyslov got better out of the opening, then he little lost it like in a time travel. Then they had a rook endgame where he had 2 pawns against 1, and then another like 30 moves, and then he kind of tricks Rogozin, gets into the another endgame queen versus rook and pawn, and plays another 50 moves, like, so basically, and then finally he kind of overcomes him. Yeah, like even like in a position that was already technically theoretically drawing, but nobody knew it at the time. So that's Smyslov for you. Like, if he knew there was something to play for, and he felt like the chances are good to squeeze something out, he would play. Same with Carlsen, same with Karpov. Like, they're from the same line of kind of the champions in my view. But he was also like didn't mind like a draw, especially with black, or even like a relatively quick draw. Again, like if he felt like the chances are not very high against a position where he kind of respected. He wasn't like Bobby Fischer either. He wasn't playing every game for the win. So he was very practical, very pragmatic in his own way, which was different from Botvinnik, different from lots of other players. But yeah, so in general, that's true. Like, that's how he played.
Okay, thank you very much. And now let's talk a little bit about the style of Vasily Smyslov, because we are just talking about it a little bit. But how much influence, especially of his father, was to Smyslov play? Because there is the anecdote that you probably remember about I was just making the jokes that if we met you as the guest, I would like to ask you if it is true. Of course, it's a little bit trolling, right? But in a sense of showing the idea. Is it true that Smyslov, before started playing, I would say, real chess, become 2000 player because he studied a lot of the end games before he started playing chess, I would say, seriously? Could they say this in a little bit joking style?
He was probably stronger than 2000 when he started. No, I'm serious.
It's even better.
Yeah, I mean, Smyslov's approach to chess, like how he started chess, was very different from pretty much everybody else. So you're right. So he had a father who was a pretty decent player. Okay, he defeated Alekhine in a 1-to-1 game. Okay, at least once. And he was like what they were calling like second or first category player, which like pre-war pretty much equivalent to the master probably. So he was pretty decent. And I was even joking that like if you compare all the fathers of the world champions, like Smyslov Senior probably would have a good, good claim to be number 1 on the list. I don't know, like maybe Henrik Carlsen is the other candidate.
Yeah.
He's taught his son at home, right? So basically, he had a good library, but he was also like a chess player, and he taught his son, and they were like, and you're right, I mean, he started education from the ending, from hand games. And at that time, it was a new idea, and it still is a new idea. It was just probably expressed by Capablanca in his chess primer. They like these book for the novices in chess. He was advising like you start with the end game, very few pieces, and you learn how they work around, and then from there you kind of progress to more advanced, like to middle game and so on and so forth, and then you talk about openings, like the game in reverse. So very few people actually tried that. Smyslov Senior did. So like he started education of his son that way, and whether it's because of that or whether because of Smyslov innate talent or the combination of that, but basically, yeah, I mean, Smyslov from the very beginning, he was very good at endgames, studies. They also solved a lot of studies. He also composed studies. That's a separate thing, like probably completely different topic. And they also played tons of games. Don't forget that. So he had a very good kind of sparring partner at home. And in the beginning, his father obviously was much stronger. So and he's mentioning like he was giving like queen odds, rook odds and stuff like that. To the point where they started playing on equal footing, and then he started regularly beating his dad. And by the way, they even played a few tournament games, when Smyslov, he went out of home when he was 14, right? So his first games outside of his house were played when Smyslov was already 14. He also played, by the way, his uncle, who was also a chess player, and so on and so forth, family. Now, he left the house, so 14 years old, first of all, relatively late. Even by those standards of the day, 14 was already kind of, well, I wouldn't say late, but he was already a teenager. But he has played probably thousands of games with really strong players, studied endgames, studied 100 chess books at home. He was saying his father had 100 chess books at home. He studied them all, like chess books and like journals, what have you. And so he goes out and he plays like in a qualification tournament with unranked players, like maybe who didn't know, how to play chess much, like until, they just came over there. He wins that tournament easily, wins the next tournament easily, wins the next tournament easily, and so on and so forth. Like his rise is pretty unprecedented. It's meteoric. So he goes like this from the time he leaves his house, and he essentially he proves to other people that he is way stronger than them.
Yeah.
And the first time he actually it goes up and up and up and up. The first time he actually faces in a position that kind of knocks him down is in 1939, and that's already international tournament.
Oh.
So that's a training tournament, so-called like training tournament, even though training tournament with Rishevsky, Keres, Lilienthal, Floor, and of course like 14 other Russian masters, best Russian masters, except for
I would say.
Yeah, so indeed, and so like that's where he ends up sharing 12 and 13 places. Like setback, you would say, right?
Yeah.
But he shares with Paul Keres.
Yeah.
And Paul Keres Paul Keres comes off his best result in his life.
Oh.
In 1938 in Abra tournament, where he shared first with Robin Fine, ahead of Botvinnik, Capablanca, Alechin, Floor, and I'm probably forgetting somebody there, but that famous tournament, right?
Yeah.
So like the next tournament that he plays in Russia, and like he's sharing second and 12 and 13 places. So Smyslov is what? 18 years old at the time, 19 years old at the time, and that's his first case where he's actually not on a pedestal, not like in the first places.
Yeah.
Almost everything before that, he went like he was winning it. So that's what I'm saying. Like when he left his home at the age of 14, I don't know what his rating was like in modern terms. Nobody would be able to tell, but he was damn strong. I mean, he was definitely master strength already then. So everything since then, anyway, he was also played, like, for example, he played in tons of like simultaneous exhibitions. And most of the time he was beating grandmasters. There was also like this, I'm writing about that in the book, there was this kind of a famous competition where they had 6 Moscow masters give a simul to 6 school children, essentially, right? And so the winner of that competition was Smyslov. None of the masters, but Smyslov, who scored like I think 5 out of 6, right? So like basically, literally beat almost everybody, and it's very difficult to estimate. And his path is completely unique. But one thing for sure is when his education at home was world class. It's like we're talking like more or less like I don't know, Garry Kasparov, Magnus Carlsen territory. He goes out and then he kind of from there almost like a short spurt to the his first world championship like tournament in '48. Amazing. Really,
let's say information that you are sharing are outstanding, because nobody knows such stuff, and that's why I'm very grateful that you will be publishing this in the books that will be available, right? Because as you just mentioned, there are no literature about Smyslov. To be honest, I am having pretty much many books, as you can see below behind me, and probably I just saw at the chess tournament stall, because there are some players that were selling the books, probably no more than 3 books about Smyslov, no more. One was some like a workbook, some like a little bit with combination. It is the Russian series, probably you know it, right?
I've seen it, yes.
Right, some like small one. It is the one. The second one that you mentioned with the red thick cover, and the third one is probably some like another one. But it was pretty much completely, let's say, forgotten, and super rare to have some books about Smyslov, except maybe 1 or 2.
Yeah, as I was chasing books about Smyslov for years, and actually also have a good library of everything that was published about that time and age. And Other than Smyslov himself, I think like there is literally like just one or two. There was one book published in America, in the United States, called like Smyslov the Champion, which was 1957 when he became a champion. Uh, uh, but like it's completely unknown. It's like published by Latvians in exile. Like they had a publishing house. It was very interesting. Um, and yeah, like almost nothing else. I, d- it's a pity, and like I was hoping that in a way I was waiting for several years for somebody else to write this book. Like I mean, like if there was some grandmaster who would write this book, probably I would never really get around to this because I would just read it. But somehow it wasn't really coming to pass, and and that reaction like from nobody will be interested, and nobody would be buying that. Like I decided to prove that wrong, like in a way. So I thought there was enough excitement, and in his games and his life, he led a very unusual life as well. So that's basically what I set out to prove.
Okay, thank you very much. And now the question from the chat, because we have more and more questions from the chat. I'm really happy, guys, that you want to ask our author about this questions that you are just putting into the chat. And one of the question is from our friend Pumpkin the Cat. And the question is, was Smyslov especially influenced by any prior chess legends like Capablanca, Endgames, and so on?
He is addressing that directly in his books. He's writing like he's basically writing. I read all these 100 books, and the short answer is I synthesized it. So he was saying he was going through phases, and in a way he's tracing all the steps that most chess players would follow. Like he started with romantic chess, sacrifices, and then he kind of kept advancing to his age, right? So let's say Morphy to Steinitz to Lasker, Capablanca, Alekhine, which was basically already modern times, and everything in between. He's even calling out special things like Tarrasch, Rubinstein, that kind of influenced him a great deal. But then he says, you know what? So I think it's very important to have this education. But I was also very conscious of not trying to copy anyone. I wanted my games to be my style, and he achieved that very obviously. That's what he was saying. Now, if you want to trace influences, I mean, I would argue that there are some players that are more clearly more influenced his style than others. So there is plenty in his game from Akiba Rubinstein, for sure. They're kind of close. Also from Capablanca, they're probably the closest match from his style, the foundation of his style. But Smyslov is also a bit more tactical than Capablanca. So he also probably inherited something from Alexander Alekhine. By the way, that was his first book. He writes about it he was. They have this family legend, he was playing his uncle when he was 6 or 7 years old, and he defeated him. I think it was actually with odds. His uncle was giving him something like a rook or a knight. But anyway, so the young boy who was 6, 7 years old won the game, and so his uncle presented him with a book as a kind of a prize. Yeah. It was Alekhine's My Best Games of Chess, and they had actually his uncle wrote on it. To Vasily Smyslov, the future world champion.
Whoa!
So and it has a date on it, so it's 1926 or 27. I have it in the book. So and the book is still in his library. Oh. That very book is still in his library. I touched it. I took a picture of that. So and he was saying that was one of the first books he literally read cover to cover. So yeah, I mean he probably got a little bit from everybody that were before his times, right? And you can still trace some parts of his style to Capablanca, to Rubinstein, maybe to Tarrasch, a little bit to Alekhine, to something like that.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question, because we have more and more questions, because the discussion is pretty much very, very entertaining and educational in the meantime. The question is from our friend Paul Daiso. What does this Carson Levin childhood chess education look like? Carson in the sense of comparison that you mentioned.
Their childhood were very different in terms their approach to chess. And I don't think anybody can ever repeat what Smyslov had as a chess education. He's quote-unquote chess universities. I mean, like, I cannot imagine anyone today
Can we
sitting
say
at home
in a
and
little bit joking way, it is something like a homeschool education? Some like
it
a little
was
bit one?
homeschooling, indeed. It was homeschooling. But can you imagine any children today, like, not playing with anyone, not going, like, outside of their house, playing chess until they're 14? I mean, come on, like, they're grandmasters now at the early age. You know? So
Absolutely amazing.
that's impossible. So his story is unique, and I don't think it's repeatable today, and I don't think it was repeatable even, like, I don't know, in 1950s, 1960s. But it was also a very different time. Remember, like, I didn't write about that in the book. I put a little bit about that on my blog. He was growing up in a very challenging times in history as well. You know, like, it's 20s. He was born, 1921. And it was hardship, very poor. You know, the country is like in tatters, civil war, not enough food, nothing. So basically, like, in a way, he grew up like that, almost like, because, like, external circumstances to some extent. So I don't think it can be repeated. It was unique, but it created a unique talent as well. So Carson is different. I mean, like, okay, Carson apparently he played a lot. You know, like, he was, like, his parents were taking him from tournament. Very different model. It's just like that. It's that talents are somewhat similar. Obviously, not the same, but, like, their styles. There, I see something in the way they play, in their and also in how they play. That's similar. So that's why I'm kind of making the comparison. But obviously, how they learn chess cannot be more different.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question related to the modern tools, because I would like you to help us to understand how difficult was that Smyslov got that far without the modern tools, because nowadays we have databases, we have engines, we have powerful computers, we have even clouds, right? Some like the data on the clouds. We have engines, we have everything practically, and therefore getting pretty much quickly is not that much super difficult if you have such a powerful tools. What about Smyslov? What was the, let's say, critical moment that he started having something like the coaching, something like from stronger players, maybe masters, and what was the biggest influence on him, except of his father that we are talking about?
Let me maybe play a little bit on that comparison about like these like information explosion, right? Like Kasparov was writing that was in 1970s, but obviously it's even much more visible today, right? Like, yes, you have all these databases and stuff like that. I would make an argument that what happened to Smyslov was, in a way, very similar. Like, he was exposed to way more information about chess, way more patterns than his contemporaries.
Wow.
So remember, like, because he was sitting at home and he was having these 100 books to read. In 1920 something, having 100 chess books at home is a treasure. Nobody else had it. So it's like, imagine like you're like you having like all these chess base and millions of games and like stockfish, and nobody else has it. You have an advantage.
Absolutely.
Right? So what happened to Smyslov, in a way, you can make and okay, like, obviously that's a bit of a stretch, but you can make the case that he was exposed to way more chess in an early age, in a much better, from much better sources, and with a much stronger sparring partner than almost everybody that he met in like 1930s, right? Remember, Soviet Union, like, there was no paper. No to print, even like, you know, like Pravda, you know, whatever. So and you have chess books, like they were few and far between. So he had a bit of an advantage, and of course, like, on top of that, you had to work, you had to read them, and he had amazing talent. So now, so that's what I was thinking. Like, it would be today. It's it's if you would have all these cloud engines and stockfish and chess databases, and everybody would have nothing. Right. So I don't know. Like, it's a bit of a stretch of an analogy, but
very good one. Very good one. Very good one. I like it because it shows not just the power of books, but rather the resources, right? Because it was the resources that back then it was very, very difficult to have it, and especially if he has such a great chess library, if we can say that, and he immersed into this. Probably this was one of the ideas, as you just mentioned, of having the patterns stored in his mind, right?
But that was only just a start, right? And so, like, then he emerges from his home. He plays his first tournament. So he was also lucky in many other respects. First of all, he was in Moscow. Not in any other city of the Soviet Union, in Moscow, center of the everything. You have best chess players. You have clubs. His first tournaments are played like in what they call like Gorky Park, like a recreation park in the center of Moscow. They still do chess club there, and it was open during the summer. So he went there like I don't know, May, June, and he played until it closed for autumn.
Wow.
Like, and he was playing almost non-stop there. He's small. It's summer, so there is no school, right? And he goes there every day. It's like it's walking distance from where he used to live at the time. So that was also another advantage. So plenty of practice when he started finally playing with other people. He had plenty of competition, and also blitz tournaments, all of these. Like, then he at the end of the summer he signs up. Like he meets Basit Zagurov, this guy, and he tells him like, you should come with us to this Pioneer Palace. And he goes to the Pioneer Palace, which is, again, relatively close to his house, same area, same region of Moscow. He gets a coach there. That's his first official coach. Well, not his personal coach. It was like, like in this kind of chess section, so coach for everybody. But he was also a very strong player, Fyodor Fogilevich. He was first category player. Like, again, think master strength. Like, they were like, I don't know, maybe 20 masters for the whole country. So, like, if you had first category, you're pretty damn good. And I think the number of first category players was under 100 at the time in the whole country. Also, like, he would later become a chess arbiter of the Soviet championship. Like, he was very respected and a good coach, so he teaches him. Then Smyslov continues to make his program. He gets more coaches. Like, at some point of time, he kind of overtakes Fogilevich. And then he starts going to another place called what was called Stadium of Young Pioneers. And there was another guy, Abram Rabinovich, who is already a master. He's literally an established master, an old one, like pre-revolutionary. He played, I don't know, like in German congresses before revolution, before like 1917. So the guy, also interesting guy. Like I also wrote an article about him. Like spoke, I don't know, like 7 languages. Like was writing in all these languages. Was writing like into chess columns in newspapers and journals all over Europe. He was very educated and a bit eccentric, but he kept on then pushing Smyslov in a different direction. For example, openings. Smyslov never studied openings, not even before, not even after. But Abram Rabinovich really pushes him, like, like, you got to play this, you got to play that. Here's this trick, here's that trick. Here's like, when he plays in his first Soviet championship, 1940, or in the Moscow championship, he actually mentions this is Abram Rabinovich novelty. Like, so, like, he was that good. And so, and later on, of course, like, when he's already like, he's fighting for the, top places in the Soviet championship, he gets official coaches. And then you have Alatartsev, who kind of latched onto him. Then he becomes, he studies with, I know, like Simagin, for example, after Alatartsev. So then he's already, but by that time he's already like, he's like probably in the world top 10, top 20. So like he doesn't necessarily need coaches, right? But he needs seconds, he needs sparring partners, this kind of thing. But he did have, so like he started at home, all these books, his father, an interesting way of education, and he lots of competition, Fogilevich, Rabinovich, and other guys. So he did have a lot of help on the way up. But that's also how the system was supposed to work, right? So like it's also how it worked for like dozens of other grandmasters later in the years, right? Like if you were identified early as a talent, you would continue going up.
Yeah, thank you very much. And let's get a little bit closer into the World Championship match, because we are just close into the peak of the strength of Vasily Smyslov. How was the, let's say, conditions back then, and what was the, let's say, critical moment that Vasily Smyslov just got into the World Championship match, and how much the other team, let's say, of coaches, seconds, and all of the helpers supported him to get that far, and how did it happen that he won this World Championship match against Botvinnik? How it happened?
Well, first of all, not from the first attempt, right? So it was Smyslov played in 4 World Championships, and he played 3 matches with Botvinnik, but he also played in a World Championship match tournament in 1948, and that's where he started. So like Alekhine died, the world was without a champion, and so like and that was a very good moment for Smyslov, because it was just after the war, and he was already well recognized as like top player in the world. He was actually, by the way, he's the only player that emerged as a candidate during the war. no other player. Like if you look at everybody else who played there or was invited, it was Robin Fine, Rishevsky, Keres, Botvinnik, Smyslov, right? So basically, and of course Max Ovi. They were all pre-war, right? Ovi was a world champion. Botvinnik, Fine, Keres, they all played like Capablanca, Lasker, all of these guys, right? So Alekhine, of course. The only new person in that circuit was Smyslov.
Yeah.
He was, I mean, okay, there was also, I'm also writing like, there was some political pressure, machinations behind the scenes. So, okay, but like maybe you can make the case that neither should have been there in that tournament. But the way it happened, Smyslov was the only one who kind of got onto that level during the war. So, and he played there, and he was the youngest. He was considered to be like a dark horse, and essentially nobody expected, like everybody expected him to finish last. He finished second.
Whoa.
So that was complete surprise, and like clear second behind, and Botvinnik was far away in the head. So that's kind of established him as a, like kind of, like a champion in waiting, if you will. Then he plays, and after the Botvinnik declared champion, then FIDE is already on the stage, and they start organizing these, interzonals, candies, all of this stuff. Smyslov is seeded directly to the candies, 1950, and doesn't win it. So it's Bronstein and Boleslavsky who win it famously. They also play the match. Then Bronstein plays with Botvinnik, loses. Not loses, draws. Loses the 23rd game. And then, but basically that means Smyslov is out of the cycle for what, like 5 years, between 48 and 53. He got in 1950 in Budapest, he finished third. He is seeded again directly into the candidates. He doesn't need to go through the interzonal. And in 1953 he wins it. Okay, so basically his probably most famous victory. He gets to play Botvinnik, plays in 54. Doesn't win it, and actually starts horribly. He loses 3 games out of 4, his first match with Botvinnik. And the fact that he draws the match after that is also amazing. But again, like, so you see, like, it's like that last hurdle, right? So becoming a world champion took him many efforts, right? So you can even rewind, like, for example, in 1941, the first time, like, world championship match tournament in 48. But before that, you also have the Soviet, what they called absolute championship. Again, quadruple round robin, meaning everybody plays 4 games against each other, 6 players, 6 backs players. So Botvinnik, Keres, Smyslov, Bondarevsky, Boleslavsky, Ilin Lital. Right? So actually, you can argue it's like, in terms of strength, it's as strong as the World Championship match tournament after that. Because, like, for example, Max Oeve was really falling off in that in 1948. In 1941, in that Soviet championship, okay, like Bondarevsky and Lilintal were behind, but they were not that far behind. So they were actually very close, very equal. So like, in a way, you see, like, so he was practicing in 1941. Then he was playing during the war, only in the Soviet Union, obviously. Then there are like Groningen 46, and like kind of think of that interzonal candidates. Then there's 48, then there's 50, then there's 53, 54. It's like there are so many tournaments and matches on the highest level that he had to go through, and in a way unsuccessfully. He didn't win them.
Yeah.
And only in 57, he finally gets over the last hurdle. He defeats Botvinnik. And by the way, even 57 was very close. And Botvinnik is 10 years older, and everybody's kind of already writing him off. Like he's like getting close to 50, and basically now, okay, like that, this is Smyslov's time, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's kind of expecting, like, foreseeing the next, 10 years of Smyslov dominating, because he was also dominating the tournaments during that time. And then he loses it. So like, because there is a return match in the rules, right? So Botvinnik, the first of the return matches, and Botvinnik easily defeats Smyslov. And after, Smyslov is never the same. So you see, like, I mean, like, it's, in a way, it's like, it's this joke, like, how did it, like, happen gradually? It's very gradually. Like, him becoming a world champion was a project, like, Smyslov got to the level of, like, world class by 1940 latest. Like, 1940 is totally world class. Like, he's playing his first Soviet championship, and he's ahead of Botvinnik and Keres and Boleslavsky and God knows what else, right? But from there to becoming a champion, 17 years. 17 years that he really has to grind. And at some point of time, people even also like kind of start to write him off.
Yeah.
Because, they think his time has passed. And you have Bronstein, who is the new star. You have Blislavsky, who is the new star, the younger. I don't know. You have Mikhail Tali coming out. Like, okay, well, nobody sees him as a competitor yet, but he's already there. And you have, I don't know, Petrosyan, Taimanov, Geller, you name it. Not to mention the Western stars. You also have like players. So it happened very, very slowly. Long answer to a short question, probably.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great because this way we can see the perspective, and in the meantime we see sometimes how much difficult it is to not just become world champion, but get after, let's say, being beaten again for being world champion. Because there are many times at the chess history that one, let's say, lost world championship match and the player was destroyed, right? Psychologically and couldn't recover.
I think, by the way, you can make an argument Smyslov was actually the first to win the championship not from the first attempt. If you look back in the history, like Chigorin didn't make it, Bogolyubov didn't make it, Avi defeated Alekhine, but from the first attempt, right? Bronstein never even got to the return match. It's like Yanovsky crashed, it's a debate twice or whatever, but essentially, if you were winning, if you were becoming world champion by the time, you're doing it on the first attempt. So Smyslov was actually the first to make it on not even the second, the third attempt, because if you count match tournament, right? That was unique. He would not be the last, obviously. Spassky would do it the same, and so on and so forth. But it's quite unique as well. Not winning it and then coming back to and finally doing it
to the top.
That was quite unique as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question from our viewers is from Mike Pumpkin the Cat. He asks, how did Smyslov figure into all of the Soviet chess politics?
Well, that's a great question, and probably take another hour or so to answer that. Smyslov did actually dabble in chess politics. Let's put it like that. He was not outspoken.
Yeah.
He preferred to work from the kind of the sidelines. To his character, he was perfectly fine being in the shadows, but he would pull strings from the shadows when he needed to.
Oh.
And in some cases, it actually turned on relatively sinister tones in a way. Probably not to the level of Botvinnik, but sometimes he did things that were probably not entirely, even ethical. There were cases where, for example, he would pull the right strings and ask his friends in the high places, and he would get a place in an international tournament instead of somebody else.
Oh.
Or he would, for example, even worse, for example, there were two cases actually when he got a place in the interzonal instead of somebody else. There was this famous case where in the 60s, there was this famous tournament of 7. The Soviet Union was a zone in a zonal competition, and they were given certain number of places for the interzonal. And because you had the World Championship, you had the challenger from the previous cycle already seeded, so the number for the Soviet Union was 4. And they organized a special tournament for defining who was going to be that 4. And they show up, and suddenly they tell you know what, actually this tournament of 7, and there are only 3 places because the 4th place is already given to Smyslov.
Oh.
And that was was not nice. From the point of view, and you have Korchnoi, if I remember, Leonid Stein, Spassky. So not an easy competition, and it was also one of those cases where it literally destroyed Leonid Stein's chances. So there was a bit of uproar, and it did a couple of times. So most of the time it was not as sinister, but he would still just basically get a little favor for himself, or one thing where we can actually kind of applaud him for, again, pulling the strings, is the Central Chess Club in Moscow. That's also Smyslov doing, at least partially. And the way it happened, basically he was he was living like he was given an apartment in like what they call like like these Stalin's high rises in the center of Moscow, and next to him lived the chief architect of Moscow.
Oh.
And like basically they were like going to each other like for birthdays, like they were neighbors. And Smyslov's like, like, well, how come that we don't have like a club for chess players? Like we don't even have anybody anywhere to invite. Like when somebody from the other countries come in and stuff like that. And basically like, yeah, like you just basically submit a request and we'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did. And they then they did figure it out, right? So like the thing that on Gogolevsky Boulevard in Moscow, that famous thing, that was literally just given to chess players because Smyslov like asked somebody politely, and then he wrote an official letter together with Botvinnik. Actually, they did it together, and I think Alatartsov was kind of running the errands like to make it happen after that. So, but yeah, I mean like he knew how to play politics in his own unique way again. And in some cases, unfortunately, I must say that like he took it for his own personal advantage. Sometimes at the at the price of others. Sometimes, he used it for good reasons and for kind of good causes. But he didn't have any kind of qualms about. He didn't have any problems with that. In his mind, he was like the way he justified it to himself was like he was the one, he was chosen,
the chosen one,
and he was. I mean, like he was very fatalist in a way. He believed in fate, and so like that was his justification. I mean, like like this is me, like I'm entitled to that, And you, the guy who didn't get the spot, well, you are not.
Got it. Thank you very much. And now let's talk a little bit about the Soviet domination. Of course, this is a little bit above the, let's say, Smyslov, I would say, topic, but I would like to ask you about the Soviet domination because it is the topic that every time it is something like repeated, and nobody who is not, let's say, from the Soviet Union and know all of the politics, all of the conditions back then, may not understand it that well. If you could start a little bit, let's say, giving us the insight into the politics, into the sport, into the regime, into the, let's say, economics, but related to chess, that back then, I'll just make a little bit of, let's say, introduction. Back then, it was the massive, let's say, massive fundamentals, and all of the players are some like getting into the more and more, let's say, circled, let's say, group, and then they were coached by the best players in the country. Can you tell us about it a little bit?
Sure. I actually wrote an article about it like a couple of years ago, like on Chess24, like history of Russian chess or something like that, like
excellent
for some of the tournaments. And essentially, and like in a way, I lived it at least like the last years of that of this system myself, right? I mean, and I also like I had a very funny reflection like before I go into like how it worked. But when I was already like in my 30s and I was living in Germany and I started playing chess again and I started taking like kind of I found myself a coach, like I played for a club and I was taking like kind of lessons from like grandmasters and stuff like that, and it was expensive, and I'm looking at, my goodness, when I was young and like I was being taught chess from age 6 until like I was 18 maybe or 19. I think I still got my more lessons in the university. I was playing for the university for a while, and they were like masters, international masters, grandmasters, and all of that was for free, like, oh my goodness, so much money invested in me and wasted on me basically. But for others who were better at chess, that translated into like dramatic improvement. It was the condition like basically nobody else had, and it was designed that way. And I'm even writing about it a little bit in the book, that chess still is often used as a political tool. It was like basically it was together, like we had chess, we had belly, we had ice hockey, and maybe cosmonautics and nothing else basically. But it was used to justify, like, look at us, like we're fantastic Soviet Union, like the whatever it is, like, it was propaganda essentially. But for chess players, it created this kind of a unique environment where essentially you got enormous advantage over anybody else from any other country. Like, okay, like there were some other countries like in what they call socialist bloc that were kind of trying to repeat it. There, yes. But if you're in the West, like you'd have to pay from the ground up, and like you probably wouldn't even get like the same level of trainers, coaches, like environment, other players to compete against. So from some point of time, it became kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And it was only like, I don't know, you had to be Bobby Fischer to kind of really kind of withstand that kind of level of competition. And that was obviously very unique. So, but they started in probably late 1920s, and the way they started, actually, it's Smyslov's times in a way. Him growing up, the idea was, like in many other countries actually at the time, some way of organization, some kind of way of recreation, entertainment, and it's cheap. Germany also did, by the way, something similar at the time, not to the same level, but they were also doing that. And they created all these clubs at the pioneers, these like young communist organizations, at the factories, everywhere. Like they had also special clubs for these, like kind of they called it trade unions for whatever reason. Had nothing to do with trade unions, but they were like structures. And the most important part of that, yes, indeed, that was enormous amount of thing you could get for free. Like I didn't pay pretty much anything. Well, maybe like I don't like there was talking money that my parents paid, but it was almost nothing, right? And you would get like all these coaches that were really like top of the line, competitions, all of these like mass organizations, and so it created a kind of environment where if you were talented, you could really quickly bubble to the top. And then you would get even more training.
That's what I wanted to ask.
So, and that's what happened to Smyslov, but that's what happened to like all the other grandmasters that came later. Like they were very good at identifying these talents early, like giving these like more better environments for them to thrive, right? So that's how, like, I know how Karpov was became very strong very quickly, very early. Kasparov, like let's forget Kasparov. Let's roll back to the Smyslov times. Taimanov. He was. He also played whatever. He tried violin or like actually piano, dabbled in cinema, but he started like playing chess, and basically very quickly he was identified as a 10, like at the age of like 10. Right. He was in Leningrad, so he was noticed by Botvinnik, and the rest is history. And he's a grandmaster, right? So that's how it worked. You cannot really repeat it in other countries because it was all really based on the foundation of state willing to pay for all of that for reasons that had nothing to do with chess. Again, because you wanted to use it as in a way like as a propaganda to prove that like because we have the best chess players in the world, then that means by corollary the Soviet Union is the best country in the world. Which probably wasn't, but that's how you kind of played it. So that's how the Soviet machine came to being.
Because
and it existed like on the way to the 1990s, like so it was a long time.
Even up to 2000, I guess, because it was the time, if I'm not mistaken, that Vladimir Kramnik was first of the player that was some like cutting off from this politics. Is it correct? Some like he's not wanted to identify too much.
No, Kramnik was still very much a product of the Soviet chess. He was in the Botvinnik school, Kasparov school, and he was also he was brought to the Olympic team when he was 16 years old, FIDE master, brought to the national team. He was later, and he was not in the same system, and it was kind of falling apart visibly. But I think in the case of Kramnik, you can make the argument probably him, or maybe just a little bit after him, are the last kind of is the last generation of the the Soviet school of chess. I would say Ivanchuk, Gelf, and Kramnik, they are still definitely that product. Later on, that probably would be already a different story, right? But yeah, at least in my mind, Kramnik is definitely up there together with he's still the kind of heir to the Soviet school of chess for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. And now let's get into another topic, because it's pretty much important to know how much Smyslov, let's say, creativity, Smyslov games, and Smyslov, let's say, behavior in a, let's say, broad sense impact the society? I mean, society in the sense on society in Soviet, but outside Soviet as well. How much impact was his, let's say, games, tournament results, all of this stuff? How much it was in the impact back then?
That depends. In the later stages of his life, not much. Probably. I mean, he was ex-champion, and he was pretty content to be ex-champion. By the way, I think he at his peak in 1950s. That's probably where you can make the argument that he was kind of a ambassador. Actually, like in the second, I think in the second volume, I think I have a chapter that I'm calling like ambassador of the Soviet Union. He was. Yeah. Because he was a world-class chess player. He was Soviet. He's also Russian, ethnically, important. Everybody else was not. Like if you're looking, Botvinnik and Talia, Jews, Petrosyan, Armenian, Keres, Estonian. Like Smyslov was like a rare case of being Russian as well. He was actually and that's why he was kind of preferred candidate, like go-to person, if you will, for representing Soviet Union abroad. And that was also, it coincided with a moment of opening up of the country a little bit. I mean, it's still Cold War for sure, but Stalin is dead. Yeah, that's important moment. So like 1953, the country starts to open up a little, and they make these they start like that's the beginning of this kind of they want to make a better impression of the world. Like you have Khrushchev, Malenkov, all of these guys, and so they start more people to the international tournaments. They start participating in Olympiads. They did before during Stalin, but that was cut short after like a few failures. And so the first tournaments in Yugoslavia, Stalin had a big beef with Tito. Like there was no relationship with Yugoslavia. In 1950, whatever it was, 4 I think, or 55, Smyslov goes to Zagreb. Yeah, not the first one to go there, but like he's being sent abroad like to he's the really nice image to the Soviet Union. But that's a very short moment, and when he becomes the next champion, that kind of fades away. And after that, his influence probably is not that significant outside of the country. He's still very much respected. He's like a really kind of legendary figure. He's people really like to invite him to the tournaments all over the world, from Argentina to Cuba to whatever, Holland. But he's not really he's not making impact as a kind of cultural icon. Tal probably would, but like the Soviet Union probably doesn't want Tal as his representative. Like that's a different story. Okay, thank you very much. And another question related to Smyslov and related to the harmony, music, and chess, because this may be a little bit of connection as well. If you can elaborate about that, and after that, I'll just ask another question. Sure. Music is huge part of Smyslov's life, and by the way, his father's life. I'm actually saying somewhere in the introduction to the book that Smyslov, almost all of his life, he is realizing his father's dreams. So Smyslov Senior played piano, sang. He apparently had a pretty decent baritone. Even auditioned with Shalyapin, the legendary singer, Russian singer. But he he never really was serious about that. Like he never made none of that his profession. He was like having really dull life as an economist or something like an accountant. And Smyslov, his son, basically kind of realized all of that. So he played chess. He also played piano. He sang, and there was a moment actually before he became a world champion, and it's also subject of the second volume, where he almost kind of quit chess to sing in the opera. He was seriously contemplating that. Remember, his results kind of stagnate. He's in the top 10, but he's not a world champion. And then he runs into a friend, and he was also kind of in artistic circles together with Taimanov as well, because Taimanov is a professional pianist, and so he knew, for example, the directors of Mariinsky Theater, of Bolshoi Theater in Moscow, and he introduces him, Smyslov, and they know Smyslov is singing. He even takes part in audition for the Bolshoi Theater, makes through the first round, fails in the second round. And you can imagine, let's say he makes it. Can you believe it? I'm pretty sure he was probably dropped chess altogether at that point. Then he returns to chess much. I mean, he continues singing, but it's like for him, it's more like a hobby, recreation. He returns to that in like, I don't know, in his 60s, 70s, like when he's very old, but he still wants to sing. He records. Actually, there are recordings of Smyslov singing. I have like vinyl, CD, tape cassettes at home with all Smyslov singing. Like, he loved it. And in for him, all of that was going through more or less the same. Like, yes, he had this idea of harmony, logic, perfection. For him, they were more or less the same words. And he was trying for these ideals in chess, in music, in life.
Yeah.
Right. So for him, all of that was kind of representation of something, I don't know, divine, if you will. So yeah, chess and music was super important in his life.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question from the chat that I promised to mention. Our friend Pumpkin the Cat is asking. He says, I've read that many of the Soviet chess players at the time had close connections to musicians and composers like Botvinnik, Prokofiev. Is there any story about Smyslov connections to other artists or musicians?
Yes, although like not on level of not Prokofiev, not Shostakovich necessarily. Although like they knew each other. Shostakovich presided was a tournament, like it wasn't tournament director, but he was like one of the organizing committee in a tournament in Kuybyshev 1942 during the war, where Smyslov was playing. Like they obviously knew each other, and there were plenty of figures from the let's say kind of a music, opera conservatories who Smyslov knew well. In my book, actually, in the first volume, there is a photo of Smyslov and Botvinnik and Tikhon Khrennikov. And Khrennikov was like a composer, was kind of very well regarded in the Soviet Empire. I think he was also the chairman of the Composers Union of the Soviet Union. So like he was also like very important functionary, so to speak. So Smyslov was kind of well regarded in the circles. So he had people. There are also like kind of funny stories, like for example about Taimanov tells the story. Although Taimanov sometimes can be unreliable narrator, but he tells the story about like his friend from a general is playing with somebody from like a conservatory, like correspondence games. One in Moscow, another in Leningrad, and like the friend asks Taiman, like, can you help me with the moves because like I'm getting like crushed here. And so they like he advises him on one move, and another move, like he gets a reply, so, oh, pretty good moves, like I would never expect. And then like later on turns out like Smyslov is helping the other guy on the other side. So like so Taimanov and Smyslov almost like playing a correspondence games to get to each other through their friends, one in music, another general. So these kind of things. So Smyslov did have an introduction through Taimanov for like the main opera theaters, Mariinsky in Leningrad, and what was called Kirov Ballet at the time, and Bolshoi Theater in Moscow. As I said, he went through the auditions, but he was actually more on the periphery there, and he was actually always perceived as an outsider, and that's probably why it never really happened. Smyslov's best friend in the chess circle was his singing coach, singing professor. And I'm writing about, I also found their letters that they exchanged about like technique and singing, and like like his singing repertoire, what he advised to for Smyslov to sing and what not to sing, and so on and so forth. But there was, as I was saying, like Smyslov was a bit on the periphery. So like there was nobody like Prokofiev or Shostakovich that like would be like his personal friend.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question from the chat is related to stuff that you were working on and you have been working on for some time. What were the most difficult things to reach and discover about Smyslov?
Pretty much everything. His like everything in his personal life is, and I mean, I find some, but I don't think anybody would really ever be able to create a complete picture of Smyslov, the person. He was very private, and like lots and lots of like his archives, like basically like did not survive, especially from his early time. in the Soviet time, he was also like very conscious of not writing down much anything that could be potentially incriminating, even at like, okay, like a lot of people in the Soviet Union was like that. So like, yeah, like there is not much. And when you go further, and like there are lots of stories that kind of difficult to corroborate, like there are no sources for that. So yeah, like almost everything about him beyond the chessboard is very hard to find and source. And maybe like, you know, like I don't know, like maybe there are some archives out there where you can find more, like, you know, like, for example, I read an interesting book were written by a person who had access to the state archives after they were kind of after the fall of the Soviet Union. I think he's still working in the state archives of Russia, and they found some kind of like folders of documents from, like, I don't know, like discussions with the Central Committee of the Communist Party, of the Sports Committee of the country, where they were kind of reviewing, like, you know, like the whatever cases, incidents, like, or planning for tournaments, like this kind of stuff. And maybe there is more you can find, but again, that would not reflect on him as a person, probably, right? Like it would be more about like, hey, the environment in which he lived. So yeah, I would say like pretty much everything about Smyslov the man was and still is hard to find.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question from the chat, because we are having pretty much very intense discussion in the chat as well. And Mike, our friend, is asking again, when writing biographies, the authors often develop deep sympathies for the person they are writing about. Did this happen to you, Andrey?
Oh, yes and no. I mean, first of all, you're right. So whoever asked this question is absolutely correct. It's kind of hard to write a biography of somebody you hate. I know I've seen cases like that, and I before I got down to this writing project, I read a couple of kind of books on how to write biographies. Essentially, like there are books like that out there as well, and so you get some affinity to your person, and you, like, if you decide to write a biography, my advice would be to find somebody who you can kind of be sympathetic figure for you, you know, like otherwise, yeah, like it will be a nightmare, a disaster. But Smyslov is very different from me, for example, personally, right? Like for me, sometimes it's even difficult to relate to Smyslov because, first of all, he's a product of a very different era. I mean, I kind of, my childhood was during the Soviet Union, but then it fell apart. My life is very different. And his personality, exactly opposite from mine. So, yeah, I mean, like I definitely got attached to Vasily Vasilyevich, and my family actually suffers from tons of, you know, jokes and stories about these, you know, like about Smyslov, and like by now they probably like have a lot of secondhand knowledge about the man. But yeah, like it's still like at some, on the other hand, like I don't, like, for example, I set out when I was writing, I did not want that to be you know, panegyric, or like, you know, I didn't want it to be like a
critic.
Only I didn't want it to be like a eulogy, or what's the right word, like I didn't want it to be only positive, you know, like I didn't want it to you know, kind of paint it only with
him, right?
Only with a, yeah, like with the bright brushes, right? He was a complicated person like everybody, and he did a few things that were kind of really not nice in his life, and I you know, like and when I get around to that, I'm not going to hide that, you know, like I want to give a balanced you know, kind of account of him as a man, of everything that he did right and he's wrong, and like, you know, like just the way he was, you know. So but yeah, like obviously in general you still get some natural affinity to the person you're writing about. It's almost inevitable.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question from the chat is, what are the most important things we should know about Smyslov? If we just make a little bit of list and very briefly, some like a bullet points, what is the stuff that we as the community, not just we right here, but the community should know, but we have never had the access for that? For example, via your works and so on. What would it be?
Let's start with the chess. So there are some kind of cliches about Smyslov, like Endgames, Endgame Virtuoso. I think there is a book called Endgame Virtuoso.
Yeah, that's it.
Logical, like kind of he liked to present his games as a very kind of end-to-end like masterpieces. That's the standard, and he kind of succeeded in building that image. The reality of him is much more complex in my view. So first of all, he was very tactically gifted. I mean, okay, you probably don't become a world champion unless you're really kind of good in all departments of chess. But in what I discovered, especially in his early years, was enormous tenacity in defense. For example, he was almost impossible to put away. Like, I mean, Botvinnik could, but most others couldn't. He really saved enormous amount of like half a points and sometimes the full points simply by being enormously active and kind of tenacious on defense. So like defense, one. Another thing that I think I super underestimate about his chess, openings. Maybe because he was actually bad at openings.
Oh.
In a conventional way, like when he grew up, like he didn't study that, he didn't know them, and that's why, by the way, that's why he also developed this defensive tenacity. He was very often in the bad position right out, like 10, 15 moves. So, but first of all, he started working in it, and around in 1940s. And second, he kind of innovated his way out of that. What I mean is that instead of playing the standard theory, he was researching and discovering things that nobody played but him before him. And he would play it for a while, and it would become an established part of theory. Now, if you look in chess, you'll find enormous number of Smyslov variations. There is Smyslov variation with white in, I know, King's Indian. There is Smyslov variation with black in Ruy Lopez in Spanish, like the G6. By the way, there are more than one Spanish variation. He also pioneered like 97 bishop f6 in a closed Spanish. He also pioneered queen d7 in Spanish. He was an inventor of h6, which later became Zaitsev system, rook e8, bishop f8. He was the first to play h6. People still play that actually, right? And so on and so forth. He was the Smyslov variation in Grunfeld. People still play it, still playable. And it's kind of a crazy idea for the time, like all this knight fd7, knight b6, knight c6. Like, he was criticized for that big time. He played what else? He played Catalan. He was one of the first kind of pioneers of Catalan. He played closed Sicilian. He was the first to do it, actually. I mean, Spassky picked it up later. But if you look into the history of closed Sicilian, like it's literally Smyslov, Spassky, Short, Nigel Short. Basically, nobody else played it for a long, long time. And so on and so forth. And so basically, that's another thing that people don't know about him. And you might be playing the variations he invented, kind of not realize it. He doesn't get enough credit for that. Also, Slav defense. I'm forgetting the Slav defense. He invented tons of there, like knight a6. He was the first to play like this system with bishop f5, e6, and like bishop b4. So yeah, like he invented a lot of stuff. Sometimes I feel he did it because like he was rather avoid the theory and invent the theory, create the theory, But still, whatever the reason, he was a pioneer. So, and I think it's underappreciated. So, like from the chess point of view, I think those are the few things. And again, like they're more like things that people probably don't know about him. There are things that people know about him, and okay, defense or chess openings and this kind of innovation. These are probably the things that people don't.
Okay, thank you very much. And one of the last questions, because in a moment we'll be wrapping up. Mike asking again, could you tell us a little bit more about the hardships that chess players endured during the Second World War, both Smyslov and more generally?
Yeah, it's a difficult topic, and a lot of the players just didn't survive the war, right? I mean, like there was a book published in '85 that tried like chess is fighting, the Russian book, about all the players who didn't return from the war and also who went through the war and kind of survived, about the tournaments during the war. Smyslov was relatively lucky. He didn't get called up to the army, and actually they were like, there was an official policy, they tried to protect all the chess players, like the best chess players. So nobody like Botvinnik, Smyslov, like Boleslavsky, none of them went to the front. He was also like super short-sighted, Smyslov, nearsighted, like he couldn't see anything already then. So like he was probably useless on the front as well. But so for Smyslov, it was mostly the only like real hardship he survived was the first months of the war and the first year when he was in Moscow until October 41, when like the fighting was literally like 30-40 kilometers away. And then he left to Kazakhstan, was evacuated together with his institute. It took him 45 days to get there, like by train. And he spent the next 9 months there studying and living like in a dormitory. And it was okay. Well, it was a bit hard, but not nearly as it was for the rest of the countries, really. There were a lot of people who, yeah, like as I mentioned, died during the war, and a lot of them probably still, like it's tragedy, and like a lot of them didn't reach their peak. Mark Stolberg is probably the one people talk probably most often. I mean, he was like 20 when he died, and he already played in the US in a Soviet Championship and defeated like grandmasters and stuff like that. He was a big talent. Bronstein compared him to Mikhail Tal, actually. He was saying like he was a Tal of my generation. Sergei Belavinets, a Moscow master, also died in 1942. He was one of the, he was the first kind of people that Smyslov had to overcome. He was playing in the Moscow Championship, in the Soviet Championships. He was like a little older, and his best result was, I think, third in the Soviet Championship in 1930 something 7. He also died. He was like a mortar, he was officer, and like he died on the battlefield. And a few more. And of course, like there was people that were, just like they survived the war, but were kind of impacted by that. More examples there that I can, and some of them are cited in the book. Like they were, some of them are opponents of Smyslov in those years. And I usually in my book I try to make at least 1 or 2 paragraphs about the people who were his opponents. For example, there was another guy who returned. His name was Iosif Rudakovsky, also played the 1940 championship after the World Championship, but he survived the war, but he caught tuberculosis and basically died at the age of 32. Rashid Nizmedinov was at the war and the end of the war in Berlin, and he was still in the army, and he was only able to return later, a few years later, so his chess career got kind of postponed. Isaac Lipnitsky, and like there are many. So war is terrible, and there is no way around it. And in a way, like Smyslov got lucky. Smyslov and Botvinnik, yeah, like they were protected. They were really taken care of.
Okay, thank you very much for this extensive, let's say, information. And now the last one question for the positive side, because we are getting into a little bit dark side, if I can say that, about Peter Svidler. Because of course, Peter Svidler just wrote the let's say. Preface into the book, and that's why I would like to ask you about a little bit of Peter Svidler, let's say, relationship with Smyslov and your relationship with Peter Smyslov. If Peter Svidler, if it is possible, how you have this one, a little bit of positive side.
Let's start with Smyslov, because like neither myself nor Peter Svidler had a lot of relation with Smyslov, unfortunately, during his lifetime. Like I met Smyslov a couple of times. I got like autographs and stuff like that when I was a kid. Smyslov played Svidler once, and Peter writes about it in the preface, but he was saying like it was kind of uneventful, relatively short draw. And yeah, so like, and then other than that, like it was for Svidler, I think it was more of like, like it's like a father figure of Soviet chess and stuff, a lot of respect, but kind of from a distance. For me, further distance. So, and for me and Svidler, like we're both from the same city. We kind of saw each other in junior championships and stuff like that. It's Peter is, I think, 1 year older than me. So and basically, like, it really depends on like your age. Like in the junior championships, like you're meeting each other very often if you're about the same age. But then he went kind of up very quickly. He was one of those talents who was really getting up very fast, and he didn't play in the junior championships like of the town or the country for that matter, because like he didn't need to. I mean, like by the age I was 16, 17, 18, he was already playing like the guys like Kasparov and Karpov, so like different like stratosphere. and that was about it. And then like the next thing um, we met in Germany. So I was living in Germany, and I was playing for a local club, FC Bayern. It was an amateur club actually, despite the really great name. And like football club was famous, but chess was like nothing to write home about. And so but we managed to get to Bundesliga.
Yeah.
1 year. And so my first game in Bundesliga was the match against Baden-Baden, which is like was winning every single year during that
very
period. And like
team.
and had the lineup like with Anand and I don't know what else, like pretty much all top grandmasters. So there I am, like sitting on a like whatever board number 5 or 6, and like Swidler sitting opposite from me, like I think he was further up the boards in Baden-Baden. He was looking at me like, "What are you doing here?" Like, and like what?
I'm playing
chess here in Germany. Like, why did they take me? Like there were so many questions in there, and obviously we lost the match badly. I was playing against Pentala Hari Krishna, just to give you an idea, right? So like, like me
Big
and my
gun.
2300, and like and this guy. I mean,
27.
After the game analysis, he's so much more variations than like I could ever be able, right? So wasn't even in competition. So we lost the match, but like okay, we hang out a little bit with Peter after that, and like kind of reconnected. I mean, like he kind of remembered me from his childhood, and so when like after that I moved to Singapore. And it was again like another 10 or 15 years later. And then I kind of when I was writing this book, and I was already close to the end of it. And then the publisher suggested like it would be nice to have somebody to write a preface.
Yeah.
And the first thing I thought was, okay, like I could use like play my childhood card and go to Peter and say like, why would you mind writing a preface for that? And he's such a kind-hearted person. I mean, he is. I mean, he's amazing.
Yeah.
So he said, well, I mean, like he couldn't refuse. So he said yes, and then he like looked at the drafts of the books, and then he wrote a really nice preface, and like he remembering his like encounters with Smyslov, and that's how it went.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a really, really amazing story because, of course, many people may not know that the author of Smyslov simply had the contact with Peter Swidler, and Peter Swidler just played one game against Smyslov, right?
Only one.
Yes, there is.
By the way, it's that game is even quoted. Like I quote a game in opening analysis of another game, so it's hidden somewhere there. But yeah, like if you really kind of if you like there is like if you search for Swidler, there is like the table of references at the end. You can probably even find it. But yeah, it's but the connection to Swidler is really more random in this case. But yeah, it was for me. It meant a lot, and like it obviously helped with recognition because like nobody know who I am, but everybody knows Peter Swidler.
Yeah, this is the case. But now after this interview, I guess there will be more people who know about you. But especially with the context of, let's say, filling the gap in chess literature about Vasily Smyslov, because as I just told you, I have let's say the contact with many people and even chess collectors, and they some like are not that much into the Smyslov. Yes, we know who is he, but there is no literature about him except of the some like a rarity, right? Some like a let's say chess collectors or the people just have some like magazines they cutting out the let's say papers and so on.
Right.
Okay.
Well, hopefully there is one more book now.
Yeah, and we are keeping fingers crossed there will be more books. Even though I know that the process of publication may be a little bit extended, but we are keeping fingers crossed.
Just writing, and publication. It takes forever.
And as you just mentioned, there is a little bit strange mathematics because normally if you have 80% finished, there is 20% in a mathematical sense. But you mentioned there is another 80, right? Therefore, it's
I think all the authors underestimate that. And I did definitely with the volume 1, but with volume 2, like there were also a lot of things happening in my life. I moved another time from one country to another, and so on and so forth. And like because I'm doing that in my spare time, like I also work, like I have a daytime work. Yeah. So it gets postponed a little longer, but I am working on it. So volume 2 definitely coming up, and once I'm done with that, after that, I will start thinking about what comes after that.
And the technical question, last one, because I just forgot to ask the question. As far as I remember, you published these volumes, this project into English and Russian, right?
Yes, yes. There is also the Russian version. That's I also have it here. Like looks like this.
Okay.
Very similar, slightly different color and like slightly thicker book actually.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, like because it was from the very beginning. I wanted to publish it in Russian as well. I mean, him being the Russian and everything, and it was also centennial from his birth. Like he was born in 1921, so we really like I contacted the Russian Chess Federation, and they supported that. And like we really wanted to make sure that it got published in 2021 for 100th anniversary of his birth, which we managed barely. So it was got published in November 21. Yeah, it's like basically if you are Russian speaking, you can probably read it in that language. Otherwise, it's in English and no other languages for the moment. But like, well, if there is any other publisher that is interested, I can definitely put you in touch with Hen and Russell.
Excellent, excellent, and we are happy because, as you probably know, Russian chess community can read in Russian without any problems. But the majority of chess world, I would say, needs to have in the English because many times the Russian language is pretty much an obstacle, right?
Yep, absolutely. So that's why I'm really happy that it got published in both.
Yeah,
and well, but the only thing it also was one of the things that delayed the second volume, because when I've had to publish it in Russian, because a lot of these source materials I had were also in Russian. Nobody else had them by me, so like I couldn't give it to somebody else to translate. I had to translate it myself and find the original sources, quotes, and put it all together. So yeah, like it took another several months just to get there, but now it's out of the way, so it's only volume 2.
Okay, thank you very much for accepting the invitation, my friend, and we are keeping fingers crossed for the success of the project, and we are very grateful that you decided to fill the gap in chess literature about Vasily Smyslov, and thank you very much for being with us and answering all of the questions and providing all of this educational stuff.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, take care.
Have a great day, night, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, take care.